The scholarship letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded neatly inside a plain white envelope that didn't look like it held anything life-changing. I almost ignored it at first. I was running late, coffee half cold, brain already listing everything I needed to get done before work. But when I saw my name printed in bold at the top, something in my chest tightened. I sat down at the small table in my room, the same table I'd studied at through high school, and opened it carefully. Congratulations. That word felt unreal. I read the sentence 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding it. $3,000. A scholarship. For academic performance. For perseverance. For potential. It wasn't a full ride. It wasn't glamorous. But it was mine. It meant books I wouldn't have to buy with borrowed money. It meant fewer shifts. It meant breathing room. I held the letter in my hands longer than necessary, letting the reality settle in. I didn't cry. I smiled quietly. Because in my family, big emotions around money were always dangerous. I folded the letter back into the envelope and tucked it into my backpack like it was fragile. Breakfast, my parents were already in the kitchen. Coffee brewing. Radio on low. My mom glanced up when I walked in. "You're up early," she said. "I got something in the mail," I replied, trying to sound casual. My dad looked over then. "What is it?" "A scholarship," I said. $3,000. The room went quiet for a split second. Not celebratory quiet. Calculating quiet. My mom smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's nice," she said. Nice. Not proud. Not excited. Just nice. My dad nodded slowly. "Every bit helps," he added. I waited for something else. A hug. Congratulations. Question about what I planned to use it for. None came. I told myself not to read into it. I always did. The check arrived a week later. Official. Clean. My name printed clearly on the front. I remember holding it in my hands and feeling something close to relief for the first time in months. I put it in the envelope and left it on the counter while I went to grab my bag for school. That was my mistake. When I came back, the envelope was gone. I assumed my mom had moved it to keep it safe. I didn't think twice. That evening, I came home to the smell of fresh paint. White. Sharp. Too clean for our old kitchen. Cabinets were half taken apart. Tools lined the counter. My dad was measuring something near the sink. "What's going on?" My mom turned, smiling brightly. "Surprise," she said. "We're finally fixing the kitchen." My stomach dropped. "With what money?" She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, we figured it out." I stood there, heart pounding, a strange dread crawling up my spine. "Where's my scholarship check?" The smile froze. Just for a second. Then she said it. "Oh, we used it." The words landed like something breaking inside me. "You what?" "We cashed it," my dad said, not looking up. The sink was leaking. Cabinets were falling apart. We needed it. My ears rang. "That was my scholarship," I said. "For school." My mom sighed like I was being unreasonable. "You live here," she replied. "This kitchen is for everyone." I couldn't breathe properly. "That money wasn't yours." She frowned. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "We're your parents." In that moment, I understood something I hadn't wanted to see before. In their eyes, nothing that belonged to me was ever fully mine. Not my time. Not my effort. Not even my future. And that realization hurt more than the missing money ever could. I stood there in the doorway longer than I realized, watching my parents move around the kitchen like nothing monumental had just happened. My dad kept measuring, marking the wall with a pencil. My mom talked about backsplash options as if she were narrating a home renovation show. Neither of them looked at me. That hurt more than if they had argued. It was the casualness of it. The assumption that this was normal. That this was reasonable. I felt my chest tighten as I tried to find the right words, but every sentence collapsed under the weight of what had already been decided. "You didn't even ask me," I finally said. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. My mom turned slowly, irritation flickering across her face. "We didn't think we had to," she replied. "You're living here. We're investing in the house." Investing. That word echoed in my head, as if my scholarship had been a contribution to their asset portfolio, as if my future had been a flexible expense line. "That money was for my tuition," I said. 4 books. 4 fees. My dad straightened up and finally looked at me. "You can work more hours," he said matter-of-factly. "You always do." There it was again. That expectation. That quiet reliance on my endurance. I felt something twist inside me, a familiar mix of anger and resignation. I had worked nights, weekends, early mornings. I had studied between shifts and fallen asleep with textbooks open on my chest. That scholarship wasn't extra money. It was relief. And they had taken it without hesitation. "You don't understand," I said. My mom scoffed lightly. "No, you don't understand," she replied. "This house needs repairs. We can't keep living like that. And it's not like the money disappeared. Look around." She gestured broadly at the half-renovated kitchen. Fresh paint. New cabinet doors stacked against the wall. I felt dizzy. My scholarship had been converted into laminate and hardware. My effort into countertops. "So that's it," I said quietly. "You just decided." My dad shrugged. "We're family," he said. "We do what we have to." That phrase hit hard. 'Cause I realized something in that moment. In their definition of family, doing what they had to meant taking from me. And doing what I had to always meant giving. I went to my room and closed the door, my hands shaking as I sat on the edge of the bed. I stared at the wall, replaying everything in my head. The letter. The check. The way my name had been printed so clearly on the front. I thought about how carefully I had folded it, how proud I'd felt without letting myself celebrate too loudly. I pulled my backpack closer and unzipped it, half expecting the envelope to still be there somehow. It wasn't. Course it wasn't. That night, I couldn't concentrate on anything. My books stayed closed. My phone buzzed with messages from classmates talking about assignments and deadlines. I felt disconnected from all of it, like my life had been rerouted without my consent. I kept thinking about how easily my parents had reframed my achievement as a household resource. Not a reward. Not an opportunity. A solution to their problem. Late that evening, my mom knocked on my door. She didn't wait for an answer before opening it. "You're being very quiet," she said. "I'm tired," I replied. She leaned against the doorframe. "You'll get over it," she said lightly. "It's just money. Just money." I bit my tongue to keep from saying something I couldn't take back. To her, it was just money because it hadn't been earned through her effort. To me, it was proof that my work mattered. And that proof was gone. When she left, I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling until the room went dark. I realized that this wasn't the first time they had crossed a line like this. It was just the first time I couldn't pretend it was accidental. For years, my achievements had been treated like shared property. My time, my labor, my success. Always available when needed. Never fully respected. That night, something shifted quietly inside me. Not rage. Resolve. I didn't know yet what I was going to do. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't going to be another thing I swallowed and moved past. Not this time. I barely slept that night. Not because I was restless. 'Cause every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same image. My name printed on that check. Clean. Official. Undeniable. And then the image shifted, warped into cabinet doors and paint cans and receipts that had nothing to do with my future. Morning came quietly. Too quietly. The house smelled like sawdust and coffee. I could hear my dad moving around in the kitchen, humming like it was any other day. That sound made something tighten in my chest. How easily the world kept moving after something important had been taken from me. I got dressed slowly, deliberately, as if speed might break something inside me. When I walked into the kitchen, my parents were already seated at the table. The new cabinet doors leaned against the wall behind them, unfinished and awkward. My mom looked up. "You want eggs?" she asked. Not a question. A routine. "No," I said. She blinked, surprised. I almost laughed at how small that moment was and how heavy it felt. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, forcing myself to stay in the room. "I need to understand something," I said. My dad sighed like he already knew where this was going. "What? Did you think about how this would affect me?" My mom frowned. "We thought you'd understand," she said. "Understand what?" "That sometimes sacrifices have to be made," she replied. The word sacrifice landed wrong. Because I hadn't been asked to make one. It had been taken. "Whose sacrifice?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "That's not fair," she said. "We're doing this for the house." "For you," my dad added. "You live here?" I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They kept saying that as if it erased everything else. As if having a roof over my head meant my future was optional. "I live here because I can't afford to move out yet," I said. And that scholarship was supposed to help change that. My mom's jaw tightened. "You're acting like we stole from you," she said. The word hung in the air. Stole. No one spoke for a moment. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking, the sound of a neighbor's car starting outside. "Yes," I said finally. "That's exactly how it feels." Her eyes widened, offended. "How dare you?" she snapped. "We raised you." "There it is," I said. The sentence slipped out before I could stop it. My dad stood up abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "So now we're the bad guys." "I didn't say that," I replied. "But you don't get to use my work without my consent." They both stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language. Consent wasn't a concept that existed in our family when it came to money. Everything flowed upward. Toward them. And resistance was labeled disrespect. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. My mom called after me. "You're being ungrateful." The word followed me out of the house like a curse. Ungrateful. I walked to school in a fog, my thoughts looping endlessly. I replayed every moment from the past few years, seeing them through a lens I couldn't remove anymore. Every time my parents had borrowed money and repaid it late. Every time they'd assumed I'd cover something because I was better with budgeting. Every time they'd praised my responsibility right before leaning on it. Pattern was suddenly unmistakable. Campus, I sat through lectures without hearing a word. My notes were a mess of half-finished sentences and angry scribbles I didn't remember writing. During a break, I went to the financial aid office. I didn't even know what I planned to say. I just needed to talk to someone who understood what that check meant. The woman behind the desk listened carefully as I explained, her expression shifting from neutral to concerned. "That check should have been deposited by you," she said gently. "Yes," I replied. It was. Her mouth tightened. "That's not okay," she said. Hearing those words from a stranger almost broke me. Not okay. Not dramatic. Not selfish. Not ungrateful. Not okay. She explained my options slowly. Placement checks. Documentation. Safeguards. For the first time since this started, I felt like someone was on my side without needing convincing. When I left her office, the air felt different. Lighter. I wasn't powerless. I had assumed I was because that's what I'd been taught. That afternoon, my mom texted me. "We need to talk when you get home." I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't reply. Not because I was avoiding the conversation. 'Cause I needed to decide who I was going to be in it. By the time I walked back through the front door that evening, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't just about a scholarship check anymore. It was about whether my future belonged to me. When I stepped back into the house that evening, the kitchen looked almost unrecognizable. New cabinet frames lined the walls. Counters were bare, stripped down to wood and dust. Everything felt exposed. That felt fitting. My parents were sitting at the table, waiting. Not worried. Not apologetic. Prepared. My mom folded her hands in front of her like this was going to be a lecture. My dad leaned back, arms crossed, jaw tight. I set my bag down slowly, deliberately, making sure my movements stayed calm even though my heart was pounding. "Sit," my mom said. I didn't. "I'd rather stand," I replied. Her eyebrows lifted in irritation. "This attitude," she began. "No," I interrupted. "This situation." The room went still. I could tell they weren't used to me cutting in. My dad cleared his throat. "We don't understand why you're making this into such a big deal," he said. I laughed once, short and humorless. "That's exactly the problem," I replied. "You don't understand." My mom shook her head. "We needed the money," she said. "That's it. End of story." "No," I said quietly. "That's the beginning of it." I took a breath and forced myself to slow down. This wasn't household money. It wasn't emergency money. It wasn't extra money. It was awarded to me because of my grades, my work, my future. My dad scoffed. "You're acting like we sabotaged your life." I met his eyes. "You did," I said. The words hung there, heavy and undeniable. My mom slapped her hand on the table. "That is outrageous," she snapped. "We fed you. We clothed you. We put a roof over your head." I nodded. "And I've been paying you back for that since I was 16, I said. They both froze. I continued, my voice steadier the longer I spoke. "I worked weekends while my friends went out. I covered my own school supplies. I paid my phone bill. I helped with groceries. I contributed every time you said things were tight." "That was your choice," my mom said quickly. "No," I replied. "It was your expectation." My dad stood up again, pacing. "You live here rent-free," he said. "That scholarship could help the whole family." That sentence cracked something open inside me. "The whole family," I repeated. Funny how that phrase only comes up when it's my money. My mom's voice dropped into something cold. "You're starting to sound selfish." I swallowed, then shook my head. "No. I'm starting to sound like someone who knows where the line is." Silence stretched between us. I could feel the shift happening. Not reconciliation. Resistance. My dad stopped pacing and looked at me hard. "So what?" he said. "You're going to report us." The accusation stung, but it also clarified everything. "I went to the financial aid office today," I said. My mom's face drained of color. "You what?" "I asked what my options were," I continued. "They told me that checks should never have been cashed by anyone but me." My dad's mouth opened, then closed. My mom laughed nervously. "You wouldn't," she said. "You wouldn't do that to us." The word us again. Always us when they were threatened. Never me when I was. "I don't want to hurt you," I said honestly. "But I won't let this disappear like it never happened." My mom stood abruptly. "So now you're threatening us." "No," I said. I'm protecting myself. Her eyes narrowed. You think this makes you independent? I think it makes me honest, I replied. My dad rubbed his temples. Fine, he muttered. What do you want? I took a breath. I want my scholarship money replaced, I said. And I want control over anything with my name on it from now on. My mom laughed sharply. We don't have $3,000 lying around. You had it when it wasn't yours, I said. The room went quiet again. This time the silence felt different. Heavier. Real. For the first time, they weren't dismissing me. They were calculating. And I realized something important in that moment. They weren't angry because I was wrong. They were angry because I had stopped being easy. I turned and walked toward my room, heart pounding but head clear. Behind me, my mom called out, "This isn't over." I paused at the doorway. "No," I said without turning around. "It finally is." That night, the house felt different. Not louder. Not quieter. Heavier. Like the walls themselves had absorbed the conversation and were holding on to it. I sat on my bed with my laptop open, textbooks stacked beside me, but I couldn't focus on a single word. My hands were steady, but my chest felt hollow. I kept replaying the look on my mom's face when I said I went to the financial aid office. Shock. Then fear. Not for me. For consequences. I realized then how rarely my parents worried about consequences when it came to me. They worried about inconvenience, about embarrassment, about control slipping, but never about whether something would hurt me in a way that couldn't be undone. I opened my email and reread the scholarship confirmation message. The language was formal, careful, precise. Awarded. Recipient. Funds designated for educational expenses only. Seeing it written so clearly made my stomach twist again. There was no gray area. No shared ownership. No family interpretation. Just facts. I closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For years, I had been living in a house where my achievements were treated like communal property and my boundaries like personal attacks. I had accepted it because it was easier than fighting. 'Cause pushing back always came with consequences of its own. Cold shoulders. Passive comments. The unspoken suggestion that I was being difficult. I wondered how many times I had chosen silence because I was afraid of being labeled ungrateful. How many times I had swallowed anger because I didn't want to rock the family narrative. Truth was uncomfortable. I had been trained to equate obedience with love. Sometime after midnight, I heard my parents arguing in low voices through the wall. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the tone. My mom sharp and defensive. My dad tired and irritated. They weren't arguing about whether they had been wrong. They were arguing about how to fix it without admitting fault. That realization hurt in a quiet way. I wasn't the subject. I was the problem to be managed. The next morning, I woke early and left the house before either of them came into the kitchen. I needed air. Face. Perspective. I sat on a bench near campus, watching students rush past, backpacks bouncing, conversations overlapping. Everyone looked like they belonged somewhere. I wondered when I'd started feeling like I didn't. In the afternoon, my dad called. I let it ring twice before answering. "We need to be practical," he said without preamble. "We can't just hand you $3,000. I closed my eyes. "You already did," I replied. Silence. Then a sigh. "We'll figure something out," he said. "I don't want this turning into a bigger issue." Bigger issue. As if it hadn't already reshaped how I saw my family. "I'm not trying to punish you," I said. "I just want what was taken returned." He hesitated. "Your mother is very upset," he added. That almost made me laugh. "She's allowed to be," I said. "So am I." When the call ended, I felt strangely calm. Not relieved. resolved. For the first time, I wasn't negotiating my feelings to keep the peace. I wasn't minimizing what had happened. I was letting it be exactly what it was. That evening, I made a decision I'd been circling for months without naming. I started looking for rooms to rent. Nothing fancy. Just somewhere that belonged to me. Somewhere my name on a document meant something. As I scrolled through listings, I realized this moment wasn't just about reclaiming money. It was about reclaiming authorship over my life. The scholarship had been the catalyst, not the core. Core was this. I was done living in a place where my future could be remodeled without my consent. The days that followed moved in a strange, stretched way, like time had decided to slow down just to make me feel every second of it. At home, no one mentioned the scholarship out loud anymore. It hung in the air like dust you could see only when the light hit it just right. My parents spoke to me about ordinary things. Groceries, weather, bills, as if we hadn't cracked something fundamental between us, as if silence could smooth over what words had already exposed. I noticed how carefully they avoided my eyes, how my mom would busy herself with cabinet handles or paint samples whenever I walked into the room, how my dad suddenly had reasons to be in the garage more often, avoidance masquerading as normalcy. It was almost impressive. I went to classes, worked my shifts, studied late into the night. On the outside, nothing about my routine had changed. On the inside, everything had. Every time I opened my textbook, I thought about the money that was supposed to make this easier. Every time I felt tired, I thought about how much harder it would be now. And every time I felt anger rise, I reminded myself why I wasn't backing down. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about drawing a line that should have existed years ago. One afternoon, my mom cornered me in the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "I don't like what this is doing to the family," she said. I looked at her, really looked at her, and noticed something I'd ignored for most of my life. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about disruption. "I don't like it either," I replied calmly. But it didn't start with me. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're making it sound like we took advantage of you," she said. "That's because you did," I answered. The simplicity of the statement seemed to stun her. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "You're twisting things," she said finally. "No," I replied. "I'm naming them." She shook her head. "You've changed," she said, like it was an accusation. I almost smiled. "Yes," I said. "I have." That conversation ended the same way so many others had. With her walking away, convinced she'd been wronged. With me standing there, oddly lighter. That night, I received an email from the financial aid office. They'd reviewed my case. They needed documentation. A written statement. Copies of the endorsement on the check. Proof that I had not deposited it myself. Seeing those requirements laid out in bullet points felt surreal. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was administrative reality. I started writing my statement slowly, choosing each word carefully. I described the scholarship, the check, where I left it, what I came home to. I avoided emotion. I stuck to facts. Because facts didn't care about family roles or guilt trips. Facts just existed. When I finished, I read it twice, then once more. My hands trembled slightly as I attached the file and hit send. That click felt heavier than any argument I'd had with my parents. Because it meant I wasn't bluffing. I was following through. A few hours later, my dad knocked on my door. He didn't wait for an answer. He never did. "You went too far," he said quietly. I closed my laptop and faced him. "I went far enough," I replied. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched into his face. "This could get ugly," he warned. "It already is," I said. "We just pretended it wasn't." He stared at me for a long moment, then spoke in a tone I'd never heard before. Do you know how this makes us look? There it was. Not how it made me feel. Not how it affected my education. How it made them look. I'm not responsible for your image, I said. I'm responsible for my future. He exhaled sharply and left without another word. I sat there long after he was gone, heart pounding, realizing something important. They weren't angry because I was wrong. They were angry because I had involved a system that didn't care about their authority. For the first time, my parents couldn't rewrite the story. And that terrified them. Late that night, as I lay in bed listening to The Quiet House, I understood the true cost of what I was doing. It wasn't just money. It was comfort. Familiarity. The illusion that family would always choose you when it mattered. Letting go of that illusion hurt. But holding on to it had been hurting me for years. And this time I chose the pain that led somewhere new. The tension in the house stopped being subtle after that. It wasn't slammed doors or shouting matches. It was worse. It was politeness sharpened into something cold. My mom spoke to me the way people speak to strangers they don't want to offend but don't care to know. My dad limited our conversations to logistics. Dinner times, schedules, bills, anything that didn't require acknowledging what had happened. I started to realize how much emotional labor I had always done to keep things smooth. How often I'd filled silence with excuses on their behalf. How many times I'd translated their dismissiveness into something more palatable so I wouldn't have to face what it actually meant. Now that I'd stopped doing that, the house felt hollow. I woke up early every day, not because I had to, but because being in my room while they moved around outside, it made my chest tight. I started spending more time at the library. More time at work. Anywhere that didn't smell like fresh paint and unresolved conflict. At work, my manager noticed the change. "You've been staying late a lot," she said one evening as I clocked out. "I've got things to handle," I replied. She nodded, then hesitated. "You know you can ask for more shifts if you need them." I smiled, tired but grateful. "Yeah," I said. "I know." That sentence stuck with me. You can ask. I had spent my entire life in a family where asking came with strings attached. Where needing something was treated like weakness. Where giving was expected but receiving had to be earned twice over. I took extra shifts. Not because I wanted to punish myself, but because I wanted a buffer. Cushion. Something that belonged to me alone. The paycheck felt different now. Heavier. More intentional. Not just survival money. Escape money. One afternoon, I received an email update from financial aid. They had reviewed my documentation. They were proceeding with an investigation. Placement funds were possible, pending verification. My hand shook as I read it. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by something darker. Fear. 'Cause I knew what this meant. Once the institution stepped in, my parents couldn't downplay this anymore. They couldn't spin it as a misunderstanding. There would be records, timelines, signatures, accountability. That night, my mom confronted me again. Not angry, wounded. "You're tearing this family apart," she said quietly, standing in the doorway of my room. I looked up from my laptop slowly. "No," I replied. "I'm just not holding it together by myself anymore." Her eyes glistened, and for a moment I almost folded. Almost apologized. Almost took it back. Then she said something that erased that impulse entirely. "We never would have done this if we thought you'd react like this." I stared at her. "You mean if you thought I'd stand up for myself?" She flinched. "That's not what I meant." "It is," I said. "You just don't like hearing it out loud." She shook her head slowly. "You're making yourself the victim." The words hit familiar and sharp. I'd heard them my whole life. Any time I expressed pain, anytime I pointed out imbalance. I took a deep breath. I didn't make myself anything, I said. I just stopped pretending I wasn't. She left without responding. That conversation stayed with me longer than the others, because it clarified something I'd been struggling to articulate. My parents weren't incapable of understanding. They were unwilling. Understanding would require them to see me as separate from them, as someone whose achievements weren't extensions of their household, whose boundaries weren't personal attacks, and that separation threatened the structure they were comfortable in. A few days later, my dad tried a different approach. He caught me in the driveway as I was leaving for work. "Let's not let this get out of hand," he said. "We can figure something out internally." Internally. I almost laughed. "For years, internally meant nothing changed," I replied. "This time it needs to." He sighed heavily. "You're going to regret this," he said. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something else. He wasn't warning me about consequences. He was warning me about independence. "I already regret staying quiet for so long," I said. "And that regret weighs more than whatever comes next." He didn't answer. I drove away with my hand shaking on the steering wheel, heart racing, but something inside me felt steadier than it ever had. For the first time, I wasn't measuring my choices against their approval. I was measuring them against my own survival. That night, I packed a small bag. Not to leave yet, but to remind myself that I could. I folded clothes carefully, placed them inside like a promise. A promise that this house was not the limit of my life. That my future was bigger than these walls. Bigger than their kitchen. Bigger than their entitlement. As I zipped the bag closed, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not fear. Not anger. Readiness. And I knew, with a certainty that didn't require their agreement, that no matter how this ended, I was done being the resource everyone felt entitled to spend. The breaking point didn't arrive with shouting or tears. It arrived quietly, on a completely ordinary afternoon, which somehow made it worse. I came home earlier than usual because one of my classes had been canceled. The house was empty. Too empty. No radio. No tools clinking. No voices. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint smell of new wood and glue lingering in the air. I dropped my bag by the door and walked into the kitchen without thinking. And that's when I saw it. The final version. Finished cabinets. Shiny handles. A brand new countertop, spotless and smooth, reflecting the overhead light. Their kitchen. Built on my future. I stood there longer than I should have, running my fingers along the edge of the counter. It was cold. Solid. Permanent. Unlike the things that had been taken from me. I tried to imagine them standing here weeks earlier, holding my scholarship check. Talking about paint colors, discussing costs, deciding that my education could wait, but this renovation couldn't. The thought made my stomach churn. I sat down at the table and felt something strange happen. The anger I'd been carrying didn't spike. Drained. What replaced it was heavier. Clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't panic or desperation. It was priority. They had chosen what mattered more. And that choice was now built into the walls. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. I started writing. Not a message to them. A list. Every time they dismissed my goals as temporary. Every time they'd used my savings as a backup plan. Every time my achievements were acknowledged only when they became useful. The list grew faster than I expected. Years condensed into bullet points. Patterns I could no longer deny. I realized something painful and freeing at the same time. They didn't see my education as an investment. They saw it as optional. Something I wanted, not something I needed. Something flexible. Like me. Later that evening, my parents came home together, laughing about something trivial. They stopped when they saw me sitting at the table. My mom glanced around nervously. "You're home early," she said. "Yes," I replied. I didn't smile. My dad cleared his throat. "We were going to show you the finished kitchen," he said. I looked up at him slowly. "I've seen it." There was a pause. My mom tried to sound upbeat. "Isn't it nice?" I didn't answer right away. I stood up and walked toward the counter, resting my palm on it again. "It looks expensive," I said. They exchanged a glance. My dad shrugged. "We got a good deal." I turned to face them. Was it worth it? Question hung there, heavier than I intended. My mom frowned. "What kind of question is that?" "A real one," I replied. "Was it worth my scholarship?" Her mouth opened, then closed. My dad sighed. "Why do you keep framing it like that?" "Because that's what it is," I said. "You didn't fix this kitchen instead of saving. You fixed it instead of letting me use the money I earned for school." My mom's voice sharpened. "You act like we ruined your life." "No," I said calmly. "You showed me exactly where it fits in yours." Silence swallowed the room. For a moment I thought she might cry. Instead, she hardened. "You're being dramatic," she said. That word again. The family's favorite eraser. I felt something settle in my chest, steady and unmovable. "I've already filed the paperwork," I said. My dad stiffened. "What paperwork?" "The replacement request," I answered. "And a formal report." My mom's face went pale. "You wouldn't do that," she whispered. "I already did," I said. Her eyes filled, not with guilt but with fear. "What are you trying to do to us?" I shook my head slowly. "I'm not doing anything to you," I replied. "I'm undoing what you did to me." My dad slammed his hand on the counter. "This is insane." "No," I said. "This is overdue." I grabbed my bag and headed toward my room. My mom followed me, her voice rising. "You're destroying this family over money." I turned at the doorway. "No," I said. "You destroyed the trust long before the money." I just stopped pretending it wasn't broken. That night, I didn't pack a small bag. Packed everything. Not to leave immediately, but to make the choice real. Clothes, books, documents. The scholarship letter went into a folder, crisp and intact, a reminder of what had started all of this. I slept on top of the covers, fully dressed, like someone waiting for a train. For the first time, the idea of leaving didn't feel like escape. Felt like alignment. The next morning, I woke before the alarm. The house was quiet again. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. Felt temporary. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen one last time, looking at the finished space. Then I turned away. 'Cause my future didn't belong to a room built on my silence. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to choose myself without asking permission. Leaving didn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happened in pieces. Slowly. Deliberately. Kind of leaving that starts long before your feet cross the threshold. I spent the next few days moving through the house like a guest who had overstayed their welcome. Careful. Quiet. Observant. I noticed things I had ignored for years. How my parents spoke to each other when they thought I wasn't listening. How easily my presence faded into the background when it wasn't convenient. How quickly conversations stopped when I entered a room, then resumed after I left. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. My mom avoided me entirely now, except for short, stiff exchanges that felt rehearsed. My dad oscillated between irritation and forced calm, like he was trying to decide which version of authority would work better. Neither of them apologized. Not once. Instead, they acted as if time itself would fix things. As if enough normal days stacked together would erase what had happened. But something irreversible had already taken place. I had seen behind the curtain. Once you see the mechanism, you can't pretend the illusion still works. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the scholarship office. Not an email. An actual letter. Thick paper. Official seal. I opened it with shaking hands. They acknowledged receipt of my report. They confirmed that the check had been deposited without my authorization. They explained the next steps. Possible reimbursement. Possible consequences. Reading those words made my throat tighten. Not because I wanted my parents punished, but because someone finally recognized that what happened mattered. That it wasn't family business. It was misuse. It was wrong. That evening, my dad confronted me again. He stood in the doorway of my room, arms crossed, blocking the light. "You didn't have to escalate this," he said. I closed my laptop slowly. "I didn't escalate it," I replied. "I responded to it." He shook his head. "You're going to regret burning bridges." I looked at him, steady. Bridges that only go one way eventually collapse on their own. He stared at me, searching for something. Fear. Doubt. Compliance. He didn't find it. That seemed to unsettle him more than anger ever had. The next day, my mom tried a different tactic. She caught me folding clothes in my room and sat on the edge of the bed like she used to when I was younger. Her voice softened. "We never meant to hurt you," she said. There it was. Intent. The family's favorite shield. "I know," I replied. "But you did." She sighed dramatically. "You're making this into something it doesn't have to be." I kept folding. "Actually," I said, "I'm finally letting it be what it is." She looked at me then, really looked like she was seeing a stranger wearing my face. "You're different," she said quietly. "Yes," I answered. "And you're uncomfortable because you don't recognize the version of me you could control." She stood abruptly, offense replacing softness. "This family sacrificed for you," she snapped. I met her eyes. "So did I said. "And no one ever thanked me for it." That night, I finalized my plans. A room I'd found across town. Small. Bare. Affordable. Mine. I signed the agreement electronically, heart pounding as I hit confirm. There was no ceremony. No applause. Just the quiet click of commitment. When the confirmation email arrived, I stared at it for a long time. I wasn't running away. I was stepping towards something. The morning I began moving my things, my parents pretended not to notice. My dad stayed in the garage. My mom cleaned the already spotless kitchen. Boxes went past them one by one. Books. Clothes. Folders. Years of my life condensed into cardboard. At one point, my mom finally spoke. "You're really doing this?" "Yes," I said. She scoffed. "All over a check." I paused, box in my hands, and turned slowly. "No," I replied. "Over respect." She didn't answer. Neither did my dad. When I carried the last box out, I stood on the porch for a moment. Not to hesitate. To mark the moment. I wasn't waiting for permission. I wasn't hoping for approval. I was choosing myself. As I drove away, my phone buzzed. A message from the scholarship office. They were issuing a replacement check. The relief hit hard and sudden, like air rushing back into lungs that had been tight for years. I pulled over and cried. Not loud. Not messy. Just tears of release. The money mattered. But what mattered more was what it represented. Validation. Acknowledgement. Justice. That night, I slept in my new room on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by boxes. It wasn't comfortable, but it was peaceful. For the first time, no one could take from me without asking. No one could decide my future without my consent. Kitchen back home was finished. Perfect. Permanent. But so was my decision. And unlike their renovation, mine wasn't built on borrowed foundations. The first weeks on my own didn't feel triumphant. They felt quiet. Unsettlingly quiet. Kind of quiet that forces you to hear your own thoughts without interruption. I slept on a thin mattress on the floor, woke up with my back sore, and still felt lighter than I ever had in that house. Every sound in the new place was unfamiliar. The hum of the radiator. The footsteps of neighbors above me. The distant traffic that never fully stopped. But none of those sounds carried judgment. None of them carried expectation. That alone felt like freedom. I set up a small desk by the window using a second-hand table and a chair that wobbled if I leaned back too far. I stacked my books carefully, lined up my folders, and placed the scholarship letter at the top like an anchor. This space was temporary, but the intent behind it wasn't. I started rebuilding routines from scratch. Morning coffee brewed slowly. Study blocks planned around work shifts. Groceries bought with a list and a calculator in my head. Every decision felt deliberate. Every dollar had a purpose. I noticed something strange happening as days passed. My anxiety didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It no longer revolved around anticipating someone else's reaction. It became practical, solvable, manageable. When the replacement scholarship check arrived, I didn't open it immediately. I set it on the table and sat across from it, letting the moment exist. This time there was no one hovering. No one calculating. No one deciding what I should do with it. I deposited it myself. Watched the confirmation screen load. Saved the receipt. That act felt ceremonial, even though it was just a few taps on my phone. Control isn't loud. It's precise. Words spread through my family faster than I expected. An aunt called to check in. A cousin texted something vague about misunderstandings. No one asked how I was doing. They asked what happened. I answered simply. They used my scholarship money without asking. Silence usually followed. Facts are uncomfortable when they can't be reframed. My parents didn't reach out for a while. Then one evening my mom called. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. She called again the next day. Then my dad. Voicemails piled up. Concerned. Irritated. Carefully neutral. None apologetic. I finally listened to one. "We don't recognize you anymore," my mom said. The sentence lingered. As if that were the problem. As if the old version of me had been the correct one. Compliant one. Flexible one. The one who absorbed impact so others wouldn't have to. I didn't call back. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. I started therapy around that time, not because I was falling apart, but because I didn't want to rebuild my life using the same patterns that had kept me stuck. In one session, the therapist asked me a simple question. "What did you learn about money growing up?" I laughed, then stopped. The answer wasn't funny. I learned that money was power. That access mattered more than fairness. That gratitude was expected, even when something was taken. That question cracked open weeks of reflection. I realized how often my parents had framed my independence as convenience for them. How my responsibility had been praised only when it reduced their burden. How my education was supported in theory but undermined in practice. Understanding that didn't make me hate them. It made me stop idealizing them. There's a difference. One afternoon, I received an email from the scholarship board confirming that the matter had been resolved and closed. No further action required from me. Reading that felt like closing a door quietly, firmly, without slamming it. I forwarded the email to myself, archived it, and moved on. A week later, my dad showed up unannounced at my building. I saw him through the window before I opened the door. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Emotionally. "We need to talk," he said. "I'm willing to listen," I replied. "But I'm not willing to be blamed. We sat at the small table, the one that wobbled. He looked around, taking in the space. "This isn't much," he said without thinking. I didn't react. "It's enough," I replied. He sighed. "We never thought you'd go this far." I met his eyes. "That's because you never thought I'd stop." He didn't argue. That was new. "I don't know how we fix this," he said finally. I considered the question carefully. "You don't fix it by pretending it didn't happen," I said. "And you don't fix it by minimizing it." He nodded slowly. No apology followed. But something shifted. Not healing. Acknowledgement. When he left, I didn't feel relieved or angry. I felt finished. Finished explaining. Finished justifying. Finished negotiating my worth. That night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights blink on one by one. I thought about the kitchen back home. Bright. Dated. Functional. And I realized something quietly powerful. They had improved their space. I had reclaimed my future. Those two things were not equal. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to make them understand that. Understanding myself was enough. Time didn't heal things the way people like to say it does. Clarified them. As weeks turned into months, distance did what constant proximity never allowed. Stripped away noise. It exposed patterns. Forced honesty where denial used to live. I settled into my routine slowly, deliberately, like someone learning how to walk again on unfamiliar ground. Mornings started earlier than I liked. Coffee tasted better than it ever had. Not because it changed. 'Cause no one commented on how much I used. No one asked what I planned to do next. No one suggested how my choices could be more efficient for them. I studied longer, not out of fear, but out of focus. Without the constant undercurrent of tension, my brain felt quieter. Capable. Present. I noticed that I laughed more easily. That my shoulders didn't stay hunched. That sleep came without rehearsing conversations I might have to defend myself in the next day. Independence wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. And that subtlety made it powerful. My parents tried to reinsert themselves in small ways. Text asking if I needed anything. A forwarded article about budgeting. An invitation to dinner framed as neutral, casual, harmless. Each attempt carried the same unspoken assumption. That nothing fundamental had changed. That I would slide back into my old role if they waited long enough. I didn't. I responded politely. Briefly. On my terms. And every time I did, I felt a small confirmation settle into place. Boundaries weren't walls. They were filters. They let in what was respectful and kept out what wasn't. One afternoon, while organizing paperwork, I found an old notebook from my first year of college. Margins filled with anxious notes. Schedules packed too tight. Reminders to work extra shifts. Apologies written in advance for assignments I hadn't even missed yet. I flipped through the pages slowly, recognizing the person I used to be. Driven. Capable. Exhausted. I realized how much of my ambition had been fueled by fear. Fear of falling behind. Fear of being dependent. Fear of giving anyone a reason to question my worth. That fear had been useful once. It had gotten me through doors that might not have opened otherwise. But it had also made me vulnerable to exploitation. People who see fear often confuse it for flexibility. They assume it means you'll bend. My parents had built expectations around that version of me. The one who could always adjust. Always compensate. Always absorb. They didn't know what to do with the version of me who didn't. That became clear during the first holiday I didn't spend at home. I stayed in my apartment, cooked something simple, and watched the city slow down outside my window. My phone buzzed with messages. Some guilt-laced. Some passive-aggressive. Some pretending everything was fine. I answered none of them immediately. For the first time, I let myself experience the day without managing anyone else's emotions. And something surprising happened. I didn't feel lonely. I felt grounded. Later that night, I received a message from my mom that read, "We miss how close we used to be." I stared at it for a long time. The words weren't false, but they were incomplete. They missed the part where closeness had required silence from me. Compliance. Sacrifice without consent. I typed a response slowly. "I miss being respected." I sent it. No follow-up. No explanation. Just truth. She didn't reply. Days passed. Then weeks. The space grew. And instead of rushing to fill it, I let it exist. 'Cause space can be information. Shows you who is willing to meet you where you are and who only wants access to where you used to be. My life continued to expand quietly. I applied for internships. I made connections. I started planning beyond survival. That shift alone felt revolutionary. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was choosing. One evening, while walking home after a late study session, I passed a furniture store with bright lights and staged kitchens in the window. Perfect counters. Matching appliances. Polished surfaces meant to sell comfort. I stopped and looked for a moment. Then I kept walking. 'Cause I finally understood something fully. Kitchen is a room. A future is a direction. They had chosen a room. I had chosen direction. That choice had cost me comfort in the short term. But it gave me something far more valuable. Agency. And once you experience agency, you can never fully unlearn it. My parents could renovate their space as many times as they wanted. Replace cabinets. Braid fixtures. Smooth over cracks. But they couldn't renovate the truth. And the truth was this. They had taught me, unintentionally but thoroughly, that my life would only be safe once it was fully mine. So I built it that way. Piece by piece. Choice by choice. Without asking. Without apologizing. And for the first time, the foundation felt solid. Closure didn't arrive as a single moment of relief. It arrived as a sequence of realizations that stacked quietly on top of each other until the weight of them changed how I stood in the world. I stopped waiting for a final conversation that would make everything neat. I stopped hoping for the kind of apology that would explain the past away. I understood finally that some stories don't end with understanding from both sides. They end with acceptance from one. Mine. As months passed, my life continued to take shape without their input. Not in rebellion. In alignment. I learned how to trust my own judgment without immediately checking it against someone else's expectations. I learned how to sit with discomfort without rushing to fix it by sacrificing myself. I learned how to say no without rehearsing explanations. Each lesson was small on its own. Together, they rewired me. I noticed how my relationship with money changed. Stopped feeling like something slippery and dangerous. Became a tool. Neutral. Earned. Directed. Every dollar had a job, and none of those jobs involved proving my worth to anyone. That alone felt like healing. My parents stayed present at a distance. Occasional texts. Carefully worded messages that never mentioned the scholarship directly. They spoke about weather, about extended family, about updates that didn't require accountability. I matched their tone. I no longer chased depth where there was none. I no longer volunteered vulnerability to people who treated it like leverage. That shift wasn't cold. It was accurate. One afternoon, I received a message from my mom that simply said, "The kitchen looks really nice now." I stared at it for a long time. There was pride there. Satisfaction. Finality. I typed back one sentence. "I'm glad you're enjoying it." And nothing more. Nothing less. I didn't add how much it cost me. I didn't remind her what had been taken. I didn't need to, because I wasn't trying to convince her of anything anymore. That conversation, as small as it was, marked something important. I no longer needed them to acknowledge the harm in order for it to be real. I had already acknowledged it myself. That was enough. I started mentoring another student through a campus program not long after. She reminded me of myself in ways that were uncomfortable. Overworked. Over-responsible. Afraid of becoming a burden. One day she mentioned a scholarship she was applying for and joked nervously about how it probably wouldn't change much anyway. I stopped her. "It matters," I said. "Even if no one else treats it like it does." She looked surprised. I recognized that look. It was the look of someone who had never been told that their effort deserved protection. In that moment, I realized something unexpected. My story didn't end with loss. It extended outward, became context, perspective, a warning and a map. I didn't become hardened by what happened. I became precise. There is a difference. Precision lets you choose who has access to you, who gets your energy, who gets your trust. I began to see my parents more clearly as people shaped by their own limitations. Not villains, not monsters, just adults who confused provision with entitlement and closeness with control. Understanding that didn't excuse their behavior, just released me from needing them to be different in order to move on. The last time I visited their house months later, the kitchen was still pristine. Everything matched. Everything gleamed. They gave me a tour like it was new again. I listened politely. I nodded. I didn't feel anger. I felt distance. Healthy distance. When I left, my mom hugged me a little too tightly. "Take care of yourself," she said. "I am," I replied. And I meant it. Driving away, I realized how much had changed since that first day I opened the scholarship letter. Back then, I thought $3,000 was the point. I thought the loss of it was the damage. I was wrong. The money was the catalyst. The real shift was internal. It was the moment I stopped allowing my future to be treated as communal property. It was the moment I stopped equating family with access. It was the moment I chose authorship over approval. I used the replacement scholarship exactly as intended. Books, fees, time, and each use felt intentional in a way it never had before. Not because I was afraid it would be taken, because I knew it wouldn't be. My life now is not perfect. It is not easy. It is not always comfortable. But it is honest. And that honesty has become my foundation. People sometimes ask me if I regret how everything unfolded, if I wish it could have been handled differently. I tell them the truth. I wish it hadn't happened. But I don't wish I had stayed silent. Silence would have cost me far more than $3,000. It would have cost me myself. My parents fixed their kitchen. They improved a room. I reclaimed my autonomy. I rebuilt my sense of ownership over my own life. Those two outcomes are not equal. And they were never meant to be. In the end, I didn't lose a scholarship. I gained clarity. I gained boundaries. I gained the understanding that love without respect is not generosity. It is extraction. And I will never allow myself to be extracted from again.